So welcome back to episode number 3 in this series on my Substack, which is called Burning Toward Transcendence. And this is the third video in a series called 15 Steps on the Spiritual Path. Now, I know that for some people it may sound too formulaic, it may sound too rigid, too abstract, the idea that there are actually stages or steps on the spiritual path. I'm aware of that. The spiritual life for each one of us is an individual and intimate experience, and it really can't be reduced to any sort of formula. And even worse than reducing it to a formula would be the idea that we should live in accordance with a formula. The spiritual life, ultimately, when it's practiced deeply and seriously, affords us or gives us or grants us a profound and deepening and ever more profound sense of unity or oneness with a higher spiritual reality. Call it by whatever name is most meaningful to you. So, and yet, on the other hand, here I am speaking about 15 stages on the path. So, the point of this exercise is not to reduce the spiritual life or to put it under the control of some sort of conceptual system. The point is to try to see where we are, to get a sense of orientation. Just as if we were lost somewhere, we had to look up at Google Maps to see where we are. Obviously, the map in the car isn't the road. The road's out there. We have to actually travel the road. So this is the point, is for orientation. And a point that I made in an earlier video is that we have so much spiritual information today. It's available in all sources, not just printed sources, but today it's available to us through YouTube videos. Everyone who has anything to say about the spiritual life has a YouTube channel. I guess I'm one of them. And when you add to that the potential that AI has for becoming a kind of spiritual teacher to us. In fact, I think after I'm done with this video, I'm going to go and ask Claude and Gemini a few questions to see what kind of gurus they would make. With all of that at our disposal, and yet living in a time without strong institutional structures, we can easily lose our way or not even find the way. So that's why I want to talk a little bit about these stages and steps on the spiritual path. I think I'll share my screen. Oh, and here we are. And let me make that full screen here. Okay, so as you remember, there are 15 stages. The first stage, unawareness, living in the real world, is not a stage. And then it runs through a series of stages. Maybe this time I'll read them out because the titles are my own. They evoke what for me were meaningful turning points in my own journey. So stage 2 is awakening, the stage of awakening or seeing the path. Stage 3 is renunciation, or stepping onto the way. Number 4 is rapture, bliss, and I call this stage beginner's bliss. Number 5 is spiritual presumption, the drug of spiritual pride. Number 6 is, to use a more technical term coming out of the Catholic mystical tradition, is sensory purgation. And my own contemporary way of expressing that is to refer to it as the experience of a well that has gone dry, that has run dry. Then 7 is spiritual standstill. And this is the moment in the spiritual life where we start to think that perhaps it was an illusion, that it was fake, that we had indigestion or spirit of some sort. And so I call that stage, was it only a dream? Then comes the stage of radical surrender. And this is a turning point in the life of a spiritual practitioner. I'll have more to say about that in a couple of minutes, actually. Radical surrender is the condition, is the situation where we simply place no more conditions upon the spiritual life or upon God or truth or reality, enlightenment or awakening. Instead of trying to create it in our image or to use it to our advantage, we come now to really the first stage of spiritual maturity where we let what ultimately is be what it is, and we conform ourselves to it rather than trying to conform it to ourselves. Number nine, and notice I'll say something in a few words about this. There's been a color change. The color coding is changed. Number nine is mystical illumination, or as I title it, an awakening presence. Number 10 is mystical effectiveness. And we'll see that actually mystics are not generally mystically inclined people. Great spiritually advanced people are usually very effective people as well. They're not people who necessarily just run away and sit in a cave somewhere. So that's mystical effectiveness. Number 10, spirit without boundaries. Number 11, mystical carelessness, drifting away. And we'll see that this is a moment, kind of a difficult moment later on in the spiritual life where we may get a little bit too accustomed to our status as illumined figures or illumined persons. And then again, the color changes, the color coding changes, and we come now to another season of purgation. And this I name mystical purgation. And this can also be thought of as the night of the spirit in the Catholic tradition. And I refer to this as the death of the sacred. And this is a very serious and perhaps even dangerous moment in this, more than a moment, phase in the spiritual life. More to say about that as we go on. Mystical death sounds pretty extreme, the fire of nothingness. And this is a degree of the spiritual life that perhaps is only been touched by some of the really greatest and most courageous mystical seekers. And in the Catholic tradition, I think particularly of Marguerite Porete, and I should say, in the European Christian mystical tradition, and also of Jeanne Guyon, sometimes in English referred to as Madame Guyon. So I'll have more to say about that as we go on. And then 14 is mystical awakening. Well, haven't we already had an awakening? Well, this is awakening at a much deeper level. And I name this stage, or I describe it, a descriptive phrase is the fragrance of non-duality. I have something to say about non-duality. It's a word that's become more popular, and not just in alternative spiritual circles, not just among those who practice non-duality, Advaita Vedanta, but it's actually also started to infiltrate into other religious traditions, other spiritual traditions, the notion of non-duality. And 15 is mystical union. Remaining in the presence, mystical union, remaining in the presence. So those are the 15 stages, and I propose to go through them. These are still overview videos, so I propose to go through them individually, step by step, stage by stage. But I still want to give a general sense of the kind of the movement, the flow along the path. And as I said, you'll notice that actually I used three different colors here for the stages. The first one is black, and that in this case is just to signify that it's not actually a step on the path. And then you'll notice if you're looking at the screen, you'll notice that I use purple and light blue, white. And I don't have anyone sitting with me. It's not a seminar, so I'm not going to get an answer. But you can also leave comments in Substack or in the YouTube video. But why? And then clearly, I hear someone say, "Well, it seems that this must relate to your reducing all of the stages of the spiritual life to two phases, and the phase which repeat themselves, which continually repeat themselves, rotate like the seasons. And so purple in this case refers to purgation or purification or cleansing. And light blue here refers to illumination. So there is a continual interplay here between the purificatory stages in the spiritual life and the illuminative stages. The illuminative stages are where we have a deeper sense or experience or knowledge or insight into the fundamental spiritual reality of life. And the purple stages refer to those phases when we are bereft of those experiences and insights, and if the purpose of which ultimately is to prevent us from becoming addicted to the pleasant spiritual sensations, and also more problematic, turning them into commodities, products that we can use to, obviously, we can try to monetize them. That's more recent terminology. But this is the problem of subtle spiritual pride, where someone who has a reputation for being spiritual begins to sort of believe in the reputation, and to maybe take secretly to relish it, and to think of oneself as a spiritual guide, an illumined person whose words are nectar to people who want to go deeper into the spiritual life. And I mean, that's all of us, of course, can, when we're good in our professions, I mean, there's a sense of confidence, a sense of pride. So we don't want to overdo this idea that we should have pride and confidence in what we do. But in the spiritual life, this can lead to presumption, which then can also lead to carelessness. And then that can also lead to the kinds of sad, unfortunate downfalls that we sometimes see among spiritual teachers and spiritual leaders. And that's sad when that happens. But sometimes, in some cases, if one had become aware that this pride, this trust in one's own powers and believing the reputation that one has, taking it for granted, this can also this is something that needs to be examined and needs to be carefully pruned away. So that's the reason for the two colors. Okay, so just for a couple of more minutes, I want to give a feeling for how this might unfold. So when we first step onto the spiritual path, whether it's because we have had we were brought to the path because of trauma, or because we've had a sudden awakening, or because we have felt the need to deepen what we've already been practicing. We see the path, we begin to step onto it, we begin to move more towards the goal. And in the beginning of the spiritual life, often we're graced with extraordinary experiences, profound feelings of gratitude, of insight, understanding scriptures and understanding the spiritual teachings that before may have been completely opaque to us. And we find ourselves able to speak ecstatically about our newfound truth. We may feel the need to try to convince everybody we know of its truth. If before we had been intellectually perhaps, or intellectually not so committed or engaged, we may find ourselves now eagerly studying ancient texts, reading philosophy, learning ancient languages, so that we can go more deeply into the tradition that has awakened us. So it's a time for enthusiastic experiences and appropriation of the path. And so I refer to that as spiritual, as beginner's bliss, sort of like beginner's luck, beginner's bliss. But it doesn't always last, because the problem is that in these early stages, with these sorts of ecstatic experiences and insights, we may actually come to think that we've come to the end of the spiritual path. We may think that we're sages and gurus and saints, and that it's only just there's only the slightest gauzy curtain of insubstantial unknowing that separates us from ultimate enlightenment. And looked at 10 or 15 years later in your spiritual life, you might find that amusing. But and it can also lead people to become spiritually arrogant and to insist on their own way, and maybe not to be so respectful of other people's spiritual paths. So those are all defects or failings that do need to be unlearned. And the way it's unlearned is in through sensory purgation, which is a term coming out of derives from the tradition of Saint John of the Cross, um, and I refer to it as a well-run drive. This is where we suddenly find ourselves bereft of all of these consolations, as they're called in the Catholic tradition, sensible consolations, the ecstatic feeling in the body that makes us feel as if we could sing or dance or jump for joy, the illumination of our mind and our heart and our soul that makes us feel as if we're sages and prophets and we've seen the truths of the ages. And it all disappears. It all disappears. It goes away in a flash sometimes. And we find ourselves wondering if, in fact, this was just a dream. Was my spiritual awakening just a fluke? And so this is the first great passage after awakening. This is the first great passage or transition phase where we have to ask ourselves why we're in this, why we're on the spiritual path. What's our purpose on this path? And it's a time for considering that perhaps it was a wrong turn, and we think maybe we should go back to the life we were living before. And someone who's really committed deeply to spiritual growth will find that that's not really an option. They'll find that actually I can't go back to being the way I was. I can't go back to that lifestyle. I don't know what happened to my spiritual illumination. It's not there, but I can't go back. And so this is the crucible in which we're tested, if you will. Um, we can't go back and we can't go forward. And so if we don't go back, then we've passed the test. And on the negative side, on the positive side, if we just simply wait in the stillness and the silence, in the emptiness, in the dryness, we'll find that something extraordinary occurs. But just prior to that, we will also come to the place where there's the second great moment of surrender in the spiritual life. The first surrender was when we realized that we were on a wrong path and we turned to the divine, to God, to a higher reality. This is often for many people, a dramatic moment in their lives, and for many people, they may not progress much beyond that. But the second moment is when we surrender all of our preconceptions, all of our selfish desires for spiritual attainments, where we agree inwardly to continue to live in orientation to the divine, even if it means that there will not be any more of these great moments of insight and illumination. We stop placing conditions upon the divine. We start understanding that ultimate reality is not the same as our small ego-shaped reality, and that to really be true to the awakening, we need to allow ourselves to be conformed to that reality. And that's more of a passive than an active process. I can't forge forward by praying more, contemplating more, going on more pilgrimages. In a way, I have to give all of that up. In a way, I have to become almost as if I weren't doing any spiritual practice any longer, because that in the dryness, I can't do it, but I don't want to go back. And it's in that season of dryness, of darkness, that unaccountably, at some point, there comes an inner fragrance of the divine life, and it comes in a more subtle way now. It doesn't so much excite our senses as it awakens like a perfume within, like a fragrance coming at the end of winter from a field in which flowers and plants and other other plants are starting to send out their scent. There's this inner, subtler awakening. And we realize that we're actually grounded, founded upon something extraordinary, something infinite, upon the divine. And Teresa of Avila referred to this as the prayer of quiet. And this is very much at the center of the of the explanation of the spiritual life that we find in many of the manualists in the Catholic tradition who were popular a century ago, century and a half ago. Manualists such as Poulain and Saudriot and others. So this is where we start to experience a mystical illumination or an awakening presence. And I won't say much more about the later stages because we'll have to go into them in more depth. It would be a little bit abstract if I kept talking about them. But again, to return to this, it's February where I am right now. It's actually late February now, and I'm in Northern Europe, North Central Europe. I'm in Germany, and just today I was out walking and I saw some crocuses. And that's in this part of the world at this time of the year, that's always a sign uh, of the spring days that are to come. The snow is still on the ground, it's yet poking through. In some places, one sees crocuses. And this is the prayer of quiet. Spiritually, this is a metaphor for the prayer of quiet. After the winter of purgation, after the winter in which we've surrendered all ego-shaped claims on the divine, on God, on the spiritual life, and as we've rested in stillness and darkness, and really suiting the season in which we are. I mean, the Catholic tradition, it's Lent right now. It's the first Sunday in Lent when I'm speaking. And as we remain in that condition of surrender and non-grasping, at some point that awakening occurs, sort of like seeing crocuses in late winter. Okay, I think that's enough for today, and I'll see you next time. And take care. Be well.